Start the logical fallacy counter. It's D-Converted Man versus William Lane Craig.
In my previous video, I misspoke when I was trying to explain that the kalam has question begging in it. What I was trying to say is that the full argumentation that one would have to give to arrive at God would be question begging if one was using the kalam in the front. The final conclusion that ends in God is begged for with the first premise of this particular argumentation. But Craig still produces a half-truth because Craig gives typically a longer version of the kalam cosmological argument. So Craig didn't really tell his audience the whole truth when he was trying to defend this objection that the kalam is question begging. He didn't say, well, when you have other arguments attached to this and you eventually end up at God, yes, then it could be seen to beg the question. And when I give it, usually I add a longer set of premises to this, so I have a longer version of this, and that could be seen as question begging or something like that. He doesn't really tell his audience any of that info, so he's still guilty of a half-truth. As far as the kalam by itself, no, it doesn't commit the fallacy of question begging. No, it has plenty of other fallacies to keep it occupied. I haven't analyzed the kalam, so in this video I'm going to do that so that it's out of the way, and you can ask me questions about that analysis in this video. Premise 1 is an outright lie. Premise 2 has natural language problems and could be equivocation or could be other issues in there. It's really hard to determine. And the conclusion is a non sequitur. Okay, so premise 1, it's an outright lie. How can I say that? Well, because we can never say everything about anything ever. Not in a logical argument, and not scientifically speaking either. We can't say everything does fill in the blank because we haven't observed everything. So this premise should have been written something like, as far as we have observed, things that begin to exist seem to have a cause. Now, why would I want the word seem in there? Well, because I don't think that this should be a deductive argument. This should be a probabilistic argument. And the reason it should be a probabilistic argument is mostly due to quantum physics. That is something that I don't really understand. Quantum physics is a realm I don't understand. But it seems that quantum physics has a way with reality that just defies what we would expect things to do. So I would be much more comfortable in putting a probabilistic form, even though it makes the argument slightly weaker technically than a deductive argument. It doesn't matter. If you have valid premises and you have a probabilistic argument, at least you have an argument that's logically valid. So premise 1 should be, as far as we have observed, things that begin to exist seem to have a cause. Now it doesn't commit the fallacy of an outright lie. Then we have premise 2, which says the universe began to exist. Here we have some natural language problems and a possible equivocation. So natural language problems aren't in and of themselves a logical fallacy, but it's something that we recognize is an issue in logic. Language is sometimes vague. For example, the word bald or the word heap. Those are both vague terminologies that in natural language we don't really have a way to pin down and clarify. There is no degree at which somebody is now bald when they weren't before. At any rate, the word universe here is something of a vague term because universe could mean different things. If by universe we mean all physical observable matter, all planets and stars and quasars and supernovas and comets, etc., all the things that we can observe and we know about, if that's the universe, then we have a theory that suggests that yes, all of this came into being at some point in time, or it didn't exist in the way that it does now, at any rate. At some point, it existed in a different format. So that different format, when everything was collapsed in on itself in the tiny, tiny, tiny point where everything was super condensed, that expanded into the universe and changed along the way. Okay, so yes, in that sense, it begins to exist. But then if you mean by universe that point as well, then no, it didn't begin to exist, because that point might have been around forever. And what about the stuff that's around that point? We can't even discuss that stuff because we have no way to even theorize what was around this tiny speck of a universe before that speck expanded into the universe that we know. So if you want premise 2 to remain as is, written in this way, without potential equivocation and without the natural language problems, then you should include a definition of universe that you're going to be using in this argumentation, and not just assume that the reader is going to know what you mean by it. So then, of course, the conclusion is a non sequitur. It doesn't follow, because the universe having a cause doesn't follow due to the first premise not being honest. It's not a correct premise, and premise 2 has potential issues that we need to clarify. So let's just assume that we fixed premise 1. We wrote it in the way that I would submit that we should write it. As far as we have observed, things that begin to exist seem to have a cause. Then premise 2, I'm going to leave alone. The universe begins to exist, but I'm going to include a definition of universe that clarifies that by universe I mean all observable planets, stars, etc. that are out there, plus the ones that we assume that are out there that we cannot observe yet, and that by universe I meant that everything that came from the tiny, tiny speck that expanded into this universe, that tiny speck was the beginning of the universe. And then I would say the universe seems to have a cause. Or I would say that the universe's cause is the rapid expansion of that tiny speck, because that's what the scientific theory says. So I would have no problem with saying that. That would be it. You couldn't tack on God to that argumentation, of course, but it would be logically valid. Well, I guess that would be a problem. So let's just say that we want to somehow tack on God. Well, it wouldn't be this argument. I would tell you that much. It wouldn't be this argument. Because even in a probabilistic form, even in a form that doesn't have the natural language issues, attacking on God at the end of this argument, no matter where you put it, is trying to assert something that has not been proven as a thing, as an explanation of something else. God needs its own independent, separate argument to establish it as a thing first. Once you have an argumentation that it establishes God as a thing, then you could use God as an explanation for other things. Okay, now that that's out of the way, back to the analysis.
Bad objection number 3. The argument commits the fallacy of equivocation. In the first premise, cause means material cause, while in the conclusion, it does not. Response to objection number 3. This objection raises the question of what it means to commit the fallacy of equivocation. This fallacy is using a word in the same context with 2 different meanings. For example, suppose someone were to reason as follows. 1. Socrates was Greek. 2. Greek is a language. 3. Therefore, Socrates is a language. The untoward conclusion results from equivocating on the meaning of the word Greek, using it first to denote an ethnicity or nationality, and then later a language. Now, in formulating the Kalam cosmological argument, I intended to speak of what Aristotle called efficient causes. Aristotle distinguished between efficient causes and material causes. An efficient cause is what brings an effect into being, what produces an effect in existence, while a material cause is the stuff out of which the thing is made. So, for example, Michelangelo was the efficient cause of the statue David, and the material cause of David was the block of marble that Michelangelo sculpted. My claim was that whatever begins to exist has an efficient cause, and therefore the universe, having begun to exist, must have an efficient cause. The charge of equivocation immediately evaporates.
But that's not how the argument is written, WLC. What you intend is irrelevant. In my last video, I intended to say things in a different way that I didn't say. So people caught me on it, said, hey, Deconverted Man, this is what you said just didn't make sense. And I'm like, oh man, I totally get why they're saying that. Now I have to explain this in text, and I have to explain it again in this video because I made a mistake. I made an error, and so I have to fix it. I have to make sure that I don't commit that error again, hopefully. So, if you intend to say something, here's an idea. You say it! You just say it, or you write it. You don't just go, well, people are going to know this is what I'm thinking. So here's WLC's actual, real argumentation then. P1, whatever begins to exist has an efficient cause. P2, the universe begins to exist. Conclusion, the universe has an efficient cause. It's interesting that this is really the actual argument that he intends to make. He doesn't make it, but that's what he just said. This is what he's intending, right? So the whole argument, pre-assuming the conclusion of God, because you're saying that it has to have an efficient cause, and the example that he gave of an efficient cause was Michelangelo and making a statue out of marble. So you need the marble to make a statue, but you need a person to make a statue. So he's the efficient cause of that. So everything needs an efficient cause. In other words, everything needs some person, some entity, like Michelangelo, making it into being, right? Right? So, the whole thing, if that analogy isn't a false analogy, is pre-assuming that God exists, and that God is responsible for everything. So even when we discover a natural explanation for something, it's still God. So let's just say that this is the argument that WLC meant to give. So the other one and its objections are now irrelevant. Okay, so P1 still is an outright lie. You can't say whatever. In fact, you would not use that word. It's a very bad word to use. It's very sloppy. Whatever, everything, dude, begins to exist has an efficient cause. You don't know that. Have you examined whatever? Do you mean everything by that? Do you mean just anything? Any old thing? And then the same issues continue with P2, that it's a potential equivocation. You have natural language issues with P2. And then, of course, the conclusion is just a non sequitur until you fix the other problems. Then you add to this issue that efficient cause needs to be explained by talking about the philosopher that came up with it and what it means and all that, and why you think it's applicable to whatever and the universe itself. And you have to do all that without a circular argumentation or pre-assuming that God did it, which is not what WLC just did. But that's what you would have to do to make this version of the argument not have logical fallacies. So last time when I asked you a question, it was, what is God made out of? And before that, I asked some other questions about, who would you choose for doctor and things like this. So for the what is God made of, lots of different answers, of course, because any answer we give is equally valid and or invalid. We don't know what God is made out of, or even if God is a thing at all. We have no way to know that. There's simply no way to establish that. Why? There's no empirical evidence. There's no test to perform. And as far as all the different religions out there, so far, I don't have a single one that's offered a logically coherent argument. So, the investigation part of the skeptic, because the skeptic is to doubt and to investigate. So, the investigation part is not yet active because I haven't found that argument. As soon as somebody comes along with a logically valid argument, then I'll investigate their religion more in detail. I've already done that with my religion, with Christianity. I want to investigate other religions more in detail just because it's interesting to me, but I don't have to unless they have an argument that they can put forth. I don't have to even spend my time doing that. And that's really what I am trying to convey with this whole purpose of being skeptical of ideas or conclusions, is if we're skeptical of X, whatever X is, we don't need to investigate X. It's up to the person that is asserting that X is a real thing to get rid of our skepticism so that we see that there is a reason to waste our time or spend our time investigating X. If we're skeptical of X, maybe X exists, but you haven't given me a reason to look into it. You haven't given me a logically coherent reason to even think that X is a thing. So I'm not going to spend my time and effort and energy investigating that claim until you have a logical argumentation for that claim. Now, you can, of course, spend your time and energy investigating whatever you want if you're interested. I mean, people do. People investigate Bigfoot and aliens and time travel and things like this because it's interesting to them. And I am interested in religion and theology and philosophy, and so I investigate them as much as I'm interested in investigating them. But that's my choice. On a purely objective basis, there isn't a reason that I have to investigate. And we don't, as humans. We don't have to investigate every single claim. That is why the burden is on the one that makes that claim, whatever that claim is. So, it's just that simple. If you have a logical argument, then I will investigate that claim further. If you don't, then I get to ignore that claim. I get to be skeptical about it, and I don't have to investigate it any further. With all that in mind, I have an interesting question, which is very difficult to answer, I think. Where do we draw the line for skepticism? For myself, I assume that reality is real, for example. That I am perceiving and experiencing reality in a way that is as close as I'm ever going to get to it, and it's real. It isn't the Matrix, for example. So, let's just say that reality is the Matrix, that it's all just one big giant computer program. How many things would I need before I accepted that reality? What amount of evidence should I require? Is this something that I can quantify? And I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know how much it would take to convince me that what I thought was reality was in fact all just a giant computer program. And so I get when some religious folk, some theologians come along and they say, you would still be skeptical even if all the evidence in the world was given to you. Well, there are humans that are skeptical despite the overwhelming evidence against their idea. For example, there's a group in New York who is the Flat Earth Society. And there's a lot of people in America who deny biological evolution, and a lot of people in America who think the Earth is 6,000 years old, despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. So, it's plausible that if there is a deity, and we had overwhelming evidence for it, that we could still cross our arms and be skeptical about it. Maybe we would think that we had lost our mind and gone completely insane. And really, who could blame us? Because up until that point, it had never been a thing. We had never seen anything like it before. And now to see something like it, yeah, that would be something that would just be a moment where I was like, am I going crazy? Is this real? Am I dreaming? Now, I don't think that that would continue for that long. It wouldn't continue more than a day, at least for me. It might be that I crossed my arms and I stayed skeptical for a day or 2 days. But I don't think that it would go much longer than that, because I'd be like, well, dang, if this is a dream, this is the longest dream I've ever had. If I'm crazy, then somebody's going to pull me out of it. And by then I would have done some sort of investigation into what I was seeing and experiencing, and have other people outside myself confirm that that's what was going on. So I would have less reasons to think that I was insane. So that's really the essence of this question, is where do we draw this line of being skeptical? Is there a way that we can quantify it? And if not, if there isn't a point where we say, okay, I need X amount of things before I stop being skeptical, I need this much data, then I'll stop being skeptical. If there isn't a way to quantify it, is that a problem? And if so, is there a solution? Or is it just, it's ambiguous, it's vague, and there isn't a solution? And so there might be something to this objection that we might always stay skeptical. I don't think I would stay skeptical if there was as much evidence for God as there is for biological evolution. I personally wouldn't stay skeptical of it. If there was one thing less, would I? And that's really the heart of this question, is this quantifiable? So let me know your answers to that question, and whatever the answers are all your answers. So you don't need to reject somebody else's answers. They're that individual's opinion, that individual's viewpoint, and that is something that I'm wanting to draw from all of us, okay? All right, thank you for listening. Thank you for your time and energy. Look forward to presenting more stuff to you in the next thing. I look forward to Lobsters and all that stuff. So, see you then.